Folk artist versus genius. I have a lot to cover and I won't be able to do all of it. This is not a subject I know everything about. I have a couple comments, good comments, some bad comments. It is a huge subject, but I'll say what I know about it. This will be very disjointed, and I only do videos when I've drank, because otherwise I would never do them. So deal with it, I guess. Like, fuck off. I take that back. I'm sorry. But mainly this video is for me anyways. I'm just amazed at my own views. So I guess where we can start is when I was watching the R. Kelly movie about how he's a pervert that rapes women and pisses on them. All the women were saying, but you have to understand, he's a musical genius. He's a musical genius though. So that draws you in because he's a musical genius. And I'm like, do you know what a musical genius is? Do you even know what genius is, right? Okay, so he has a nice voice and he has talent. Talent is not the same as genius. Talent is like a little sprout that could become a genius one day in 100 years. Every retard on the street has talent and probably has a nice voice. So a genius, like, you don't pull that fucking word out willy-nilly unless you're an idiot, I guess. Because I guess if you're... The thing about idiots is that compared to an idiot, anybody, even a molecule smarter, a brain cell smarter, is probably a genius. So you can't take them very seriously. But if you actually have studied music, you would see how deep, how much genius can, how great genius can get. And when you see that, and then you look at R. Kelly, you're like, okay, he's a retard then. And, you know, Kanye West probably would be a genius if people like Bach and Mozart didn't exist. Yeah, he'd be like a musical genius, sure. And if you didn't know who Mozart and Bach are, and you didn't have any musical understanding whatsoever, Kanye West would be a genius. I mean, if you had a lobotomy, my cat would be a genius. Right, Geek? My cat's name is Geek. Yeah, you'd be really impressed with the way she can, like, walk around and, like, eat her food. It would amaze you. I bring up R. Kelly and Kanye West just because they're the current people that disgust me, but not because they're black. Because I hate all of rock music, even the Beatles. I think it's all shit. I don't think any of them are geniuses. I don't think Kurt Cobain was a genius. I don't think Lou Reed. I think they're all idiots, right? Ah, God damn it. I mean, in terms of musical talent, they're like in high school. So compared to somebody who's in preschool, they're very impressive. So, like, you know, like a 13-year-old girl would be impressed by a 16-year-old guy who, you know, has a little motorbike, you know. And, you know, but the thing is, I'm not saying they're shit. None of them are shit. I think Kurt Cobain is really cool. I think the Beatles are really cool. I think Bob Dylan was really cool. But the thing is, you don't use the word genius to describe them. And this is where I bring in folk. These are folk singers. They sing for the folk. They sing for the common man. Is there anything wrong with singing for the common man? No, there isn't. I think everybody, and this goes down to, like, I think everybody should learn how to sing. Everybody should learn how to play an instrument. Everybody should learn how to dance. Everybody should learn how to, paint a painting. Everybody should do everything. That's part of a full-rounded life. Everybody should play a sport. Everybody should read a book. Everybody should, whatever, clean their toilet. Like, it's just part of a well-rounded life. But just don't go around calling them a genius because they learned how to play guitar. It's really fucking annoying. So what I'm trying to say is it's okay to dabble in something. And that's what all these people are. Kurt Cobain, Donald Trump, Bob Dylan, P. Diddy, Kanye West, R. Kelly. They're all dabblers, and they're really just doing it to make money and whatever. Who cares? And that's fine. It's okay to dabble in shit, just like it's okay to paint a painting. It's okay to take a dance class. Nobody expects you to be Pavarotti if you want to try to practice singing opera. Nobody expects any of that. Nobody's going to fault you for that. It's okay. It's wonderful. In fact, it's part of a well-rounded life. But the term genius should be reserved for somebody who devoted their entire life towards one specific thing at the expense of everything else. They learned, let's say, singing at the expense of reading a book, or learning how to drive a car, or learning how to do mathematics, or learning how to study music, or learning how to paint a painting. They sacrificed everything so they could just learn how to sing. Or a ballet dancer, they sacrificed everything. They got nothing else except for that. That's where genius is. That's what it's reserved for. Okay, so I'm done on the topic of that. And now I'm going to talk about folk. Folk music, folk everything. Folk tales. So I'm going to give a brief history. And correct me if I'm wrong, please. I might be wrong. I'm really not an expert in this. But music, okay. So back in the day, like in Mozart's time, the only person who ever got to listen to a Mozart symphony or a Mozart string quartet or anything by Mozart, or music, period, was somebody who was in the aristocracy, right? Mozart would have a symphony or a fucking quartet for the king or the queen, and you'd only be invited if you're like one of the higher ups. So you'd never get to hear a Mozart symphony or a Mozart quartet unless you're aristocratic. The regular people were just, they're just sitting at home. And it's the same with the art world. Like, if you wanted to see a painting by Leonardo da Vinci, you'd only see it if you had an audience with the king. They would adorn the hallway as you walk towards the king. You wouldn't get into that hallway unless you're a big deal, right? So you never see a great piece of art. You never get to appreciate anything if you're the common folk kind of person. So I think that's where folk music and folk tales and all this shit originated, was because it was for the common folk, the people who couldn't do all this stuff. And that's where you have folk singers, because they got songs because they don't get to participate in the higher shit. But I think this is very difficult to articulate, but one of the good things about this system was that people like Mozart were able to perfect their craft to the nth degree, and Bach, and all of them. So they were able to create the greatest music ever. Whereas folk singers, folk music, there wasn't that kind of pressure on them. So I'm not saying the aristocracy deserves better music or anything like that. I'm just saying this is the way it evolved. And so folk music evolved to be the kind of music that just pleases the masses. Whereas high quality music, like, I'm not saying aristocratic music, but I'm saying genius was about being as perfect as possible. Folk music is more about just everybody having a jolly good time while we get drunk and whatnot, because they didn't have access to the higher in knowledge, counterpoint, all the things involved in creating great music. Music is really my specialty, so that's the only thing I can really reference. But I'm sure it's exactly the same in the painting world. I mean, back in the day, like fucking 200 years ago, people didn't even have access to books. So you'd have to make up, I guess, maybe that's where nursery rhyme, I've never even thought of this. Maybe that's where fairy tales come from. They didn't have knowledge. They couldn't reference things. They would just have to say, there's a girl named Little Red Riding Hood, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's why it's a folktale, because they didn't have access to Galileo and fucking Dante and Socrates and all the information, right? That's why it was called the Dark Ages, I think, was right. It was because they didn't have access to books. But what I'm doing is I'm making a connection between folk music and pop music. And I'm making a distinction between I'm making a distinction between art for the masses and art for the individual. Now, one of the greatest geniuses who ever lived, named Goethe, and Nietzsche, the famous philosopher Nietzsche, once said that, he based his idea of the Superman on Goethe. And Goethe once said that art is for the individual, not for the masses. Anybody who thinks that art, this is one of my favorite quotes, anybody who thinks that art is for the masses is in error. So I'm basically saying, play your folk songs, make your folk art, or call it pop art. I'll just call it folk art. We'll just call it folk. Folk culture. Not pop culture. Folk culture. Do it, but just don't try to say it's art. Don't try to say it's genius, because genius is when you've excluded everything and you've you deprived yourself of everything in life so you can do one thing. The fact that the fucking aristocrats were the reason that geniuses first originated, or at least they first originated in terms of music. That's purely incidental. I'm not making any comment on like whether you got a lot of money that makes you more worthy of genius. I'm not making a comment on that. And very often there's a crossover. You'll have a person who did not write for the folk but became extremely famous, like Franz Kafka. Right? He wanted all his shit destroyed when he died. He wanted all of his writing destroyed, but his sister disobeyed his last fucking request and published his shit anyways, and that's why we know of him. And now he's entered into pop culture. Or you'll have somebody who never wanted to like be deep, and they were just a folk person, but they were a pop culture person, but they became profound accidentally. Somebody like Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens. And so now I'm wondering what my actual point was, because I haven't actually thought about this subject in this depth before. But I know I'm getting to it right now. First of all, my point is, don't throw around the word genius if you don't even know how high it gets. Right? Like, if you've never taken a dancing class, don't assume somebody's a genius just because they can do the splits. Right? Don't assume Bob Dylan's a genius just because he knows how to play the guitar or he can throw a few words together. Just because you've never done either of those things is not a good enough reason to call them a genius. Secondly, I'm not really a big fan of the word genius. The word should only be used for somebody who's like surpassed everybody else. I mean, that's fine. Bach did that. Bobby Fischer did that. But R. Kelly didn't do that. He did not surpass anybody. Like, neither did Kanye West. Neither did the Beatles. They did not surpass anybody in terms of their ability at their craft. Thirdly, in this day and age, what used to be of the aristocracy versus the folk is now pop culture versus people who are educated. I'm not sure educated is the right word. Pop culture versus people who specialize in something. Maybe that's better. Dilettantes versus artisans, maybe. I suppose the point of this whole thing, for me, my point right here, is nothing. It's not a great point. My point is just don't call people geniuses if you don't fucking know how deep genius goes. If you don't even know what you're talking about, don't assume that somebody's a genius just because they're in grade 2 math and you're in grade 1. And I guess my point is that I've been figuring it out as I've been dictating it. Folk music is now pop music, and real music has ceased to exist. Or real music, I mean great music, like perfect music. Great art, masterpieces, works of genius are no longer, they're not even on the map anymore. Yeah, so in a world like that, of course R. Kelly would be a genius. Okay, I figured out my point. My point is that now there are real geniuses out there, but they are not making art for the masses. They're making art for the individuals. And they are not going to sell out stadiums. And they probably won't even be known, such as myself, of course. But they are likely to be known in 1,000 years longer than the current Madonna or Elvis Presley, flash in the pan bullshit, fucking folk assholes, pop culture bullshit. It's kind of funny. Maybe I'll rename it fuck art. Like, instead of folk art, fuck art versus real art. I mean, I guess we've reached an extreme where fuck art is now pop culture. It's pop culture is folk art, and then real art is just, I don't even know what that is. It's just shit that nobody even cares about anymore. And that's fine, because it's okay that only a few people can appreciate something that's like really artistic, whereas millions and billions of people can appreciate Britney Spears. It's actually kind of romantic. The word connoisseur occurs to me. Connoisseur as opposed to a dilettante. Somebody who specializes versus somebody who just kind of dabbles. Yeah, whatever the fuck. I made my point. If you support gays, click like. If you respect blacks, comment. If you think women are people too, click the notification bell. And if you care about sick children, subscribe.